Yasher Koach to Reb Shlomi Shulman for that siyum. It should be a schus for the neshama of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Zatzal, and for the entire tzibor. I want to say good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to commemorate the fourth Yahrtzeit of Sar Hatorah, the Gadol Hador, Maran Harav Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal. And it's interesting to note that while many titles were bestowed upon him, certainly towards the end of his life, Reb Chaim, as he was known to so many, had no formal title. He had no formal position, similar to some of the greatest Chachamim in our history, Tanaim and Amoraim, who were simply known by their name. And the Aruch explains they didn't need a formal title. They didn't need a position for people to recognize and respect their greatness. Reb Chaim was a rare example of an unpretentious Ohev Hashem. And his life really fits the Rambam's definition of what it means to be an Ohev Hashem, that a person loves Hashem, ad shetei nafsho kishura ba'avas Hashem, v'nimtza shoga ba tamid. Somebody who's constantly thinking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the description that the Rambam gives for Avraham Avinu. He mailas Avraham Avinu, shekara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ohavo, lefi shelo avad ela me'ahava. Now sometimes when someone's in love, Chazal tell us, Ava mekalkalas es ashura. Sometimes love makes you do crazy things. Sometimes extreme love and passion can lead a person astray. But Reb Chaim, similar to Avraham Avinu, with his extreme humility and his timimos and his yiras Elokim, it fueled a life of unceasing consistency, commitment, measure, guidelines. There was never an Ava Mekalkelas Es Ashura. We're here tonight not just to honor his memory, but also to study his life and connect to all the lessons that he left behind, and to be inspired, to learn from him. Although, as Reb Shlomi mentioned, maybe Reb Chaim's accomplishments were things that are beyond our reach, but he teaches us how we too can use our kochos, ben adam lachavera, ben adam lamakom, to live life to the fullest and bring nachas ruach to the Ribono Shel Olam. The Gemara in Yoma, Daf Lamed Hamad Beis, says that although everyone's judged individually, based on what they can do, based on their potential, there are people who are mechayev you. There are people who show you that you could have done more. Hillel mechayev es ha'aniyim, Rabbi Elazar ben Charsa mechayev es ha'ashirim, and Yosef mechayev es ha'rishayim. And I think in our generation, Reb Chaim was and continues to be a mechayev to us, to push ourselves in Avas Hashem, in Avas Hatorah, in Avas Yisrael, and he showed us that with enough willpower and determination, we too can be consumed with Avas Hashem. May we all grow from this event tonight, and may his memory continue to inspire us, and may he be a Melitz Yosher for all of Klal Yisrael. I want to thank all the participating shuls. It's appropriate for Reb Chaim, who was such an Ohev Yisrael, that as you see on the advertisement, this brought together so many shuls. I also want to thank Mr. and Mrs. Stewie Shabbos for sponsoring L'Zecher Nishmas B'Tzalel Ben Shimshon HaKohen Shabbos, Alav HaShalom, Mr. Herbert Shabbos, his Neshama Shadav and Aliyah. And last but not least, I want to thank Reb Chaim Wilkach for organizing this impressive event from start to finish. For 4 years in a row, he's taken on this important role of bringing the community together to commemorate Reb Chaim's Yahrtzeit. Kadosh Baruch Hu should repay you for your devotion. Amen. Tonight we're honored to be hosting Rabbi Glatstein, who's first time in our shul. He's the Rav of Kilos Avos Yisrael in Cedarhurst. He's a well-known speaker. He's the author of 9 Svarim. He's a talented researcher and teacher of Torah with a global following. You can look online at Torah Anytime and find 4,000 shiurim of his. If you ever listen to him, he combines passionate and inspirational oratory skills with in-depth Torah knowledge and insight. And he's known for his extremely well-researched shiurim and classes that show his countless hours of preparation. I remember somebody gave me 5 years ago when his sefer Mystery and Majesty on Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot came out, and I just couldn't put it down. It was that enthralling. It's a tremendous kavod to have him with us tonight, and I'd like to ask him to share Divrei Torah and Divrei Zikaron to commemorate the Yahrtzeit of Maran Rav Chaim Kanievsky.
The opening Ramban in Masechta Megillah asks a stunning question. It's a question that, it's such a busy time, we sometimes forget to think about. The Ramban says the basic premise of Judaism is a certain sense of unity, a certain achdus. Certainly, we want to all be observing the same mitzvahs. Torah achas u'mishparecha lekulanu. You don't want to have one person putting tefillin on their arm and another person putting tefillin on their leg. You don't want to have one person keeping Shabbos on the 7th day and one person on the 3rd day. You don't want to have one person sitting in a sukkah in Tishrei and one guy in Nisan. So how is it that while the entire Torah is uniform, when it comes to the Yom Tif of Purim, you have some people observing Purim on the 14th of Adar and others observing on the 15th of Adar? This flies in the face of the most basic concept of Torah achas lekulanu. That's the opening question of the Ramban in Masechta Megillah. Now when you start a speech, you're supposed to thank the host and the shul. I don't like to be predictable, so I'll come to it later. So Ramban says historically, you need to understand how the Yom Tov of Purim was formulated, how it was legislated. You see, in year 1, when Klal Yisrael was saved from the decree of Haman, they thought to themselves, who was really in danger? The Prazim were in danger. The open cities were in danger. Al kein hayudim ha-prazim hayoshivim b'arei ha-praz oisim eis yoim arba asar. Says the Ramban, in year 1, they legislated Purim only on the 14th of Adar. Because they realized, they recognized, the only people who were in danger were cities that didn't have a wall around them. Why in the world would a city that had a wall around it celebrate Purim? They were never really in danger. Therefore, they never established Purim for cities that are mukafim chayma. They never made Purim for them. It just was never established. So when did cities start observing Purim on the 15th? Says the Ramban, not until year 2 did they realize, did they appreciate what? We're only protected with a wall. The wall is what protects us. Im Hashem lo yishmarir shav shak ad shaimer. And what? And if we don't have a wall, then we're not protected. If Hashem wanted to protect us without a wall, we couldn't be protected. So in year 2, they came to a deeper recognition that, you know what? The mukafim chayma were also in danger. And therefore the Ramban says, if you examine the second to last parak of Megillas Esther, you'll notice that after establishing Purim on the 14th for the Prazim, they then ahead in year 2 established Purim for the mukafim. But since maybe to a certain extent they were not as in danger as the Prazim, to indicate that, and because they never established Purim for the Mukafim Chayma simultaneously, they gave it a separate day. They made it on the 15th of Adar. In other words, if you wanted to know, what does Shushan Purim represent? What would you say the 15th of Adar, what does that day represent? It represents the concept that we are not protected by walls. Our Shmira, Shmaryahu, Yosef Chaim, our Shmira comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Our Shmira is divine. We're not protected by walls. We're not protected by forces. We're protected by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The idea, the concept that Reb Chaim Kanievsky's Yahrtzeit is on Shushan Purim. This is not coincidental. The essence of Shushan Purim is inherently connected with the life of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim taught us, Reb Chaim showed us that the protection of the Jewish people goes above and beyond walls and physical protection. Everybody knows, so long as Reb Chaim was around, no missile hit Bnei Brak. So long as Reb Chaim was around, we didn't have October 7th. Look at what the world looks like in the aftermath of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. That's the life of Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim's Yahrtzeit is seared into the day of Shushan Purim, the day that Klal Yisrael realized, Im Hashem lo yishmar shav shakat shomer. There's another very fundamental connection between Shushan Purim and the life of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Chassam Sofer also asked the Ramban's question. Chassam Sofer in Torah Moshe asks, how could it be that we don't all observe the same Yom Tif? We don't have any similar example of a Yom Tif or a mitzvah that some Jews observe it at one time and other Jews observe it at a different time. Says Chassam Sofer, there's a very simple reason. All mitzvahs are important. All masim tovim are important. But one of the tenets of Judaism is that Torah is the Torah's Chaim. Chavetz Chaim explains, what does it mean Torah is the Torah's Chaim? That means if you were to open up the Rakiah, if you were to open up the Madurei Mata, and you would look in the inner workings of the universe, and you would want to determine and ascertain, what is the life force of this world? What pumps vitality into this world? We would see that this world has vitality through Torah. That the Torah is a Torah's Chaim. It literally is the life force of creation. And therefore the Chassam Sofer says, Purim is a great day. We hear the Megillah. We give out Mishlayach Manos. We give Matanos L'Avyonim. We eat a Suda. These are great mitzvahs. They're Midivrei Nevi'im. But we don't have the same opportunity for Limud Torah on Purim that we do any other day of the year. So Anshe Knesses Hagdoila Baruch Kodsham needed to stagger Purim. They needed to make two separate days, so that when Jews in New York or New Jersey or Maryland are celebrating Purim on the 14th, the Jews in Yerushalayim and in other cities, they're engaged in Talmud Torah and they're keeping the world going. And when the Jews of Yerushalayim are observing Purim on the 15th, the Jews in America or elsewhere they're upholding the world. You can't have the whole world observe Purim on the same day. Who's going to hold up the world? Who reflected this idea in the last 100 years? That uninterrupted Limud HaTorah B'Hasmada upholds all of creation more than Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Is it a coincidence that his Yahrtzeit is on Shushan Purim? What is Shushan Purim? It's the day that bespeaks to the Jewish people, we can't all be doing this on the same day. There is something that is so vital that we need to stagger Purim. There's nothing worse than false humility. Who could possibly adequately be able to estimate and evaluate the greatness of Reb Chaim Kanievsky? It's a true honor to be here. I thank the Rav and the Shul for hosting this event. I want to thank my dear friend Reb Chaim Wilkach for organizing tonight and bringing me here. I heard the name Stewie Shabbos, who mentioned to me that he's from Pittsburgh. My grandfather was a Rav in Pittsburgh for more than 70 years, and that's a very long time to be a rabbi. You know that? So it's an honor to be here. What I'd like to share with you this evening is what I call 10 ingredients, 10 components in the life of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And it's not just a historical analysis, it's not a biographical analysis. Perhaps we can take some of these ideas, we could learn from some of these ideas and apply them in our own lives. So when you talk about Reb Chaim Kanievsky, the first thing we need to mention is Reb Chaim didn't come in a vacuum. It's not that suddenly Hashem brought Reb Chaim Kanievsky down from the heavens, from under the Kisei HaKavod, and he parked him in Bnei Brak. Reb Chaim came from somewhere. So a couple once came to the stipler and asked the stipler for a bracha in Hatzlacha in Chinuch Habanim. Okay? It's a good idea. What better address is there than to go to the stipler to get a bracha for success in chinuch habanim. And the stipler said, there are no brachas. We have brachas. What bracha? I should give you a mazonos. What bracha do you want? An ala michya? There are no brachas. The only thing that's effective in raising children is tefillos. Says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, says the stipler, you see Chaimol over here? You see Chaimol? So the stipler, of course, is Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father. You see Chaimol? Every single day, I daven incessantly that Chaimol should grow up with Yiras Shamayim. Chaimol was already 52 years old, one of the Gedolei Hadar. In fact, there's another story that Reb Chaim Kanievsky used to learn in the afternoon with the stipler, even after Reb Chaim Kanievsky was 52 years old. And one time Reb Chaim told the stipler, today after Mincha I'm not going to be able to learn with you. Stipler said, what happened? So Reb Chaim said, actually, there's a wedding of a Yasoim and a Yisoima, and it would really mean so much to them if I participated in the Chasana. So I'm not going to be able to learn with you today. So I said, okay. So they daven Mincha together. And Reb Chaim figured before he goes to the Chasana, he's going to say goodbye to his father. One last goodbye before he goes to the Chasana. And he sees the stipler, he's davening, he's swaying, he's crying. It's like he's davening Ne'ilah. What happened? So Reb Chaim asked the stipler, is everything okay? What happened? What happened? He says, what happened? I've been davening decades and decades for you, that you should be a loimei Torah, and look what's happening. You're going to a chasana in the middle of the Seder? These are the kinds of tefillos that the stipler put in to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. People from all over the world came to the home of the stipler, asking him for brachos, asking him for tefillos. Could you imagine? Decades and decades of tefillos and demais of the stipler going went into creating Reb Chaim Kanievsky. One of, if not the most important obligation that a parent has toward their child, the most important responsibility that a parent has to their child is to daven for them. Daven for them doesn't mean on Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan, because you got a few notifications that it's the day that's Mesugel for the Tefillah of the Shla, you should daven for your child. Daven for them means the entire day, all day. The Mishnah Berurah identifies 3 specific locations that are Mesugel to daven for one's children. Mishnah Berurah says in Birchas Hatorah, when you say V'niya anachnu v'tzatzoinu, the Mishnah Berurah brings when in Avarabba, when you say V'sein b'libeinu l'havin, and then in Uvalat Tzion, when you say the words Laman, Loiniga, Lorik, Loinele Labahala. But there are many, many junctures, there are many places in the davening that are mesugel to daven for children. The Belzer Rebbe once pointed out, Belzer Rebbe identified that the key spot in davening to daven for children is in Moedim when you say Atahu Ledar Vadar. When you say the words Ledar Vadar, that's the specific juncture that's identified as a place to daven for one's children. So they asked the Belzer Rebbe, if davening for one's children is so important, why weren't the Anshe Knesset Gdola koivea a separate bracha to daven for one's children? The Belzer Rebbe said, it is such an important tefillah. It is the most important thing that we daven for. We need to do it underhanded. We need to do it undercover. Because if the Mekatrigim would get wind that we're davening for future generations, it would be too great of a fight. So we have to do it backhandedly. So therefore, Anshe Knesset or Masakin, the words Ledar Vadar. Tosfos in Bracha says the place to daven for children is in Elokai Nitzar. When you say the words Benavshi Ke'afar Lakoil Tia. Tosfos says, just like Afar lo yichle, just like you can't destroy Afar, so we're davening the nafshi ka'afar, that our children should have continuity. There are many, many junctures. The Ramchal says in the Derech Hashem, when you say V'shinantam levanecha, V'dibar tabam, that is the key spot. There are many, many spots, but it's not designated to this word, to that word, to this day, to that day. Rav Wolbe pointed out that if somebody kills b'shoigeg, they're on a roof, they're chopping wood, they kill someone b'shoigeg, so what do they have to do? They got to go to the Ari Miklat. And how long do they have to stay there? Ad mois ha-kohen gadol. They stay there until the kohen gadol dies. So you can imagine, you have these chevra in the Ari Miklat, and after davening, a guy goes up to the Amud, and he starts saying, Shir ha-malois mi-mamakim. They say, who's sick? Is everyone sick? No, they said, no, he's not sick yet. He's not sick. We're davening he should become who? The Kohen Gadol. We're davening that he should die. So the Gemara says, what did the Kohen Gadol do wrong? That now all the people who killed b'shoigeg, they're hanging out in the Ari Miklat until the Kohen Gadol dies, as if they're going to be praying for him to die. What did the Kohen Gadol do wrong? What does the Gemara say? The Kohen Gadol should have davened that nobody kill b'shoigeg under his guard, on his watch. So Rav Oba asks, what? The Kohen Gadol should have davened that nobody kills b'shoigeg? Where in Masechta Yuma does it say that the job of the Kohen Gadol is that he needs to daven that no one kill b'shoigeg? We just read Parshas Tetzaveh. It says something there that a Kohen Gadol has to daven that nobody kills b'shoigeg. It says he puts on a choshen, he puts on an ephod, he puts on a tzitz. In Parshas Achremos, you have the whole list of obligations of a Kohen Gadol. Nowhere in Chamnishei Chumshei Torah or in Mishnah or in Gemara or in Tosefta or in Mechilta or anything that Reb Chaim Kanievsky had in his Chayvos, nowhere does it say that a Kohen Gadol needs to daven that people don't kill b'shoigeg. Says Reb Oba, must be that since the Kohen Gadol is in a position of authority, common sense dictates that if you're in a position of responsibility, your primary achrayus is to daven for the people you're responsible for. We don't have to say a pasuk in Chumash, Lama likra svarahu, which means, says Rav Oba, the most important obligation of a parent. You thought it was driving carpool. No. The most important responsibility of a parent is to be davening from morning until night at every red light as you're pushing a cart in the store, wherever you are, every day, all day, to daven for your children. You think Reb Chaim Kanievsky just came? He landed in Bnei Brak? He had a father, the Stipler Goin, who was crying demoi shalish, that he should have a son who's a Yer Shamayim and a Gadol b'Torah. His tefillos were payal very greatly. That's the first important ingredient of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim would say that before he could recognize the letters of the Aleph Beis, before he could learn a pasuk in Chumash, before he could learn in a Mishnah, his father taught him Baal Peh, the names of all the Masechtais, in a tune. I don't know that this is the tune. It might be, Brachaisu Peyadim Ai Klayim. That he taught him the names of all the Masechtas, the best part of the song. Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Bas, Rasan Hedron. Reb Chaim knew the names of all the Masechtas, all the Parshiyos, all the books of Tanakh, and all the Masechtas in Mishnah and Shas, before he even knew the Aleph Beis. Not only that, Reb Chaim taught it to his daughters. 50 years later, his daughters knew the order of Shas, so if the daughter came into the house, she was able to arrange the Masechtas. She was able to tell if they were in order or out of order. Reb Chaim used to laugh that there was a wife of a certain Gadol who always put Masechta Shavuos before Pesachim, right after Pesachim, because she thought that Shavuos is about the Yom Tov of Shavuos. But Reb Chaim said, my kids know that Shavuos is not in Moyed, Shavuos is in Nezikin. Why would the Stipler do this? Why did the Stipler teach Reb Chaim the names of the Masechtas? You get schar for saying the names of the Masechtas. If a guy comes into a Beis Medrash and he starts reading the names of the Masechtas, or he goes to the Art Scroll Gemara, Brachas 1 star, Brachas 2 star, Shabbos 1, Shabbos 2, Shabbos 3. What benefit is there in knowing the names of the Masechtas, in knowing the names of the Parshiyos, and knowing the names of the Svarim of Tanakh? Reb Chaim said it's very simple. It engenders in a child cheshkas haTorah. If you know the names of the Masechtas, you want to learn them. You want to know what's inside of them. You want to understand them. Reb Chaim would say that his mother used to make fish, gefilte fish, but she would also make carrots. And every fish had a slice of carrot on top. The kids liked the fish, they didn't like the carrots. So everybody left over the carrots, but Reb Chaim held that it was bal tashchas. So Reb Chaim would play a game with them. He would pile up all the carrots after the kids were finished with the fish. And he would sing the song, and whoever landed on Uktzin, you are out. And they had to eat the carrots. That was the chinuch in Reb Chaim's household. What was the value of knowing the names of the Masechtas, the names of the Parshios? Because when a child grows up, they know that what has value, what they need to put their efforts in, what they need to be searching for and engrossing in is Torah, Shas, Upaiskim. This is how Reb Chaim grew up. Reb Chaim grew up with a tremendous cheshek haTorah that was engendered in him by his father from a very young age. Before he learned the Aleph Beis, before he learned Chumash, before he learned Mishnah, he knew Baal Peh, the names of the Masechtas of Shas. In fact, people used to say, Reb Chaim would come into Nevardik and he would say, test me on Shas. He couldn't even read a Mishnah yet. What he meant was, test me on the names of the Masechtas of Shas. It's interesting that, the Yom Tov of Pesach is coming up, so one of the favorite parts of the Haggadah is Echad Miyodeya, Shnei Luchos Habris, Shloisha Avos, Arba Imahos. So the Stipler had a different version of Echad Miyodeya. This was a version the Stipler learned in Nevardik, and the Echad Miyodeya of the Stipler went as follows. Echad Miyodeya, Echad Ani Yodeya, Echad HaChoifer Bor Siach U'Ma'ara, Babakama, No Nomad Beis. Shnayim Yodeya, Shnayim Ani Yodeya, Shnayim Oichsim Betalis, Bamitzia Daf Beis. Shloisha Miyodeya, Shloisha Sha'achlu Ke'echad, Brachas Memhei. Arba Avos Nazikin, Babakama Daf Beis. Chamisha Tamin v'Chamisha Muadim, Babakama. Shisha Arayos Chamurus Me'ela, Yevamas Yud Gimel. Shivas Yomim Kodim Yom HaKippurim. Shmoina Shrotzim Amurim B'Torah. Tisha Chanuyos, Asara Yuchsin Olam Bavel. I don't know the tune that they sang in Nevardik. It doesn't sound anything like, the new tunes that they have today. The Nevardik tune, if you know anything about that, is not similar to any of the new tunes, that's for sure. Echad asar yoim bein nida lenida. Shnayim asar dodin hayu lekiyar. The kiyar had 12 spigots. Shloisha asar kaihanim zachu ba'yuma chafei. That was the Stipler's version of Echad Miyodeya. So Reb Chaim took it further. Reb Chaim didn't want to stop at Shloisha asar. So Reb Chaim added, Ora ba'asar boikinas hachametz. Chamesh esrei arayos, poitros soroiseyen. Shisha asar shechalios b'Shabbos, Psachim Pei Gimel. Shiva asar yovlois manu Yisrael, Erchin Yud Gimel. Shmoina asar dvarim gazru boi b'yoyim. The 18 things that were gozer on that day. Shabbos Yud Ches, Shabbos Yud Gimel. Tisha asar dvarim nemru b'gora. Ad esrim ama adam yoshev b'tzel sukkah. And then they found in one of Reb Chaim Kanievsky's Gemaras that Reb Chaim finished the song based on Shas up to the number 100. So you'll ask, what exactly is the value of making an Echad Miyodeya from Shas 21, 22, 23? What's the value of that? It sounds like there are better ways to spend one's time. What is the value of finding these factoids from Kol HaTorah Kula and adding and compiling it to the list of Echad Miyodeya? So actually, Reb Chaim would say as follows. Reb Chaim would say, if you look in Masechta Brachos, on Daf Chaf Hey, Reb Chaim would say, in Masechta Brachos, you have a Gilyon HaShas. In the Gilyon HaShas, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Rashi says, Lo yadati. I don't know. I might even have it over here. Oops. Rashi in Masechta Brachos on Daf Chaf Hei says, Lo yadati, I don't know. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger in the Gilyon HaShas, Rabbi Akiva Eiger has small notes on the side of the page. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, Rashi says, I don't know. Let me tell you all the times Rashi says, I don't know, in Kol HaTorah Kula. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger gathers 1 place, 2 places, 3 places, 4 places, 5 places. And Rabbi Akiva Eiger brings quite a long list. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky says, the longest Gilyon HaShas in all of Shas, and Yushalmi, is the number of things Rashi doesn't know. So they asked Rabbi Chaim, what in the world is Rabbi Akiva Eiger doing? Rabbi Akiva Eiger has nothing better to do than, what's he doing? He's trying to show how much Rashi doesn't know. Look how much he doesn't know. It's not only he doesn't know something in Brachas Chaf Hei, he doesn't know so many things. And the other problem is, it seems like Rabbi Akiva Eiger left out a lot of things that Rashi didn't know. There are a lot of other things Rashi didn't know. There are many other times Rashi says, I don't know, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky filled in the list. So they asked Reb Chaim, what was Rabbi Akiva Eiger doing? And what exactly are you doing? So Reb Chaim said as follows. Reb Chaim says, it brings honor to the Torah. It glorifies the Torah. If when you learn something, you could connect it to another similar idea here, and another place in Shas where a similar idea applied, it honors the Torah. It's what we make tzitzin u'prachim la Torah. It adorns the Torah. It brings glory to the Torah. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger was learning the page. And what hit him instantly is a list of 9 places that Rashi didn't know. Rabbi Akiva Eiger wasn't trying to write an exhaustive list of all the places that Rashi said he didn't know. This is what hit Rabbi Akiva Eiger off the bat. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger wrote what came to him. Reb Chaim said, I focused my mind, I summoned up Kol HaTorah Kula, and I was mashim the list. Certainly Rabbi Akiva Eiger himself could have done that. But this was an operating principle in how Reb Chaim Kanievsky worked, where many of the things that he was metzayin, or he added, or he wrote, was for a specific purpose of bringing glory to the Torah by finding these special connections. So this is a second element of the life of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. In other words, the stipler, his father, engendered within him from a very young age a cheshek for Torah. It all depends. What do kids hear growing up? Who are we talking about? What's the conversation? What are the songs? Who do we look up to? What gets us excited? Even a child who doesn't learn Mishnah yet, he doesn't learn Gemara yet, he could tell from the excitement of a parent, he could tell what gets your juices going, what's important in this world. Here's the third ingredient. Simply the time that the stipler spent learning with Reb Chaim when he was a young boy. Every Friday night, the stipler would learn with Reb Chaim for many hours. They learned Parak Kol Shah of Psachim. By the way, Chazon Ish lived in the same house, in the same room. The Chazon Ish sat on the side, and Chazon Ish would, chime in with Ha'arais. As the stipler was learning with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, I would have liked to be a fly in the wall in that room on those Friday nights. But not only that, the stipler learned with Reb Chaim Kanievsky Erevin, Zvachim, Menachos, Chulin. He said, I'm going to learn with you all the hard Masechtas, and then afterwards you'll learn on your own the easier Masechtas. So Reb Chaim said, the Masechtas he learned when he was 12 and 13, he knows the best. The ones that he learned when he was 14, he knows a little bit less. The ones that he learned when he was 15, a little bit less. And the Masechtas, the final Masechtas he learned at 16, when he finally finished Shas with Tosfos for the first time, he knows the least. He says, you know why? Because the earlier you learn something, even if it's a matter of years, months, days and even hours makes a difference in your understanding and retention. Girsa de Yankusa is not just objective. That Girsa de Yankusa means what I learned between 3 and 15. And between 15 and 30, it's not Girsa de Yankusa. No, it's all relative. Relative to 14, 13 is much better. And relative to 13, 12 is much better. And Reb Chaim brought a raya from Shas, from Shabbos Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, that even a matter of hours makes a difference in the realm of Girsa de Yankusa. Reb Chaim says until this day, he has the hardest time with Baba Basra, because that was the final Masechta he learned with his father. So it's very interesting. Reb Chaim didn't just, again, land somewhere. He had a father who learned with him. You can't learn Zvachim and Chulin and Menachas in 10 hours, in 50 hours. We're talking about the Stipler teaching Reb Chaim probably hundreds of hours the Stipler spent learning with his son. You know, I once had this chus to visit the Rosh Yeshiva of Telz, Rav Ram David Goldberg, and he shared with me a kuntris that he wrote called Kuntris Chanoich Lanar. It's a kuntris on Chinuch Habanim, and he brings there that the Brisker Rav spent 10 years of his life learning with his sons. And what that means is, the Brisker Rav learning with his sons meant that was his primary occupation. Instead of shir, instead of writing svarim, instead of all the other tremendous contributions that the Brisker Rav made, they were on halt for 10 years. He gave up a decade of his life to learn with his children. And Rav Goldberg points out, but look what that brought to Klal Yisrael. How much Torah there is today in the world that came through the children of the Brisker Rav, that the Brisker Rav held, it is worthwhile, it is important, it's obligatory, it's his responsibility to give up of his achrayus to Klal Yisrael, his achrayus to Torah in general, to learn with his children. So this is what I consider a third essential ingredient in who Reb Chaim Kanievsky was. Here's a very interesting ingredient. I think it's a relationship that somehow in our times is not the same that it once was. I'm going to ask you a trick question. It shouldn't be a trick question, but usually it is. Who is the greatest of all the Rishonim? Who's the greatest of all the Rishonim? Most people, you ask them, they'll say, oh, the greatest of all the Rishonim? The Rambam. The Rambam is the greatest of all the Rishonim. Okay, that's nice. This is an Ashkenazic shul, isn't it? Sometimes? So they have a Nusach Ashkenaz. That is not what Ashkenazim believe. Svardim believe the Rambam was the greatest of all the Rishonim. The Ritva says, Mi Moshe v'yad Moshe lo yikam k'Moshe. Ashkenazim don't accept that. We don't say the Rambam is the greatest of all the Rishonim. The Rosh says the greatest of all the Rishonim is Rabbeinu Tam. You know that? The Rosh says Rabbeinu Tam is Gadol b'chachmo v'minyan mikol ha-Rishonim. Avada. Balei HaTosfos. Ashkenazim. And who's after Rabbeinu Tam? No, not Rashi. The Ri Hazaken. The Ri Hazaken. The Ri Hazaken was next generation of Balei HaTosfos. The Ri Hazaken. Who's the uncle of the Ri Hazaken? Rabbeinu Tam. So I was always astounded that the Ri Hazaken is, a great-grandson of Rashi. And his uncle was Rabbeinu Tam. They say, in America, liberals like to say it takes a village to produce a child. No, we don't believe that. It takes a father to produce a child. It takes a mother to produce a child. And it also takes an uncle. In America, in this generation, people don't value the relationship of an uncle, the important hashpah an uncle has on a child. Yes, the father of Chaim Kanievsky was a Stipler guy. By the way, His mother was, of course, a wondrous tzaddikus in her own right. Of course, Rebbetzin Bat Sheva was the daughter of Rabbi Yashiv. Actually, she was exceptional in her own right. She would every day bring a cup of coffee to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. I don't know how big it was. I don't know, 6 ounces, 8 ounces. But if he made a siyum, she would bring him an extra large cup of coffee. And Reb Chaim had a chavrusa shaft on Friday with Reb Tzvi Yabrav and Reb Yitzchak Zilberstein. And on one particular Friday, the Rebbetzin comes out with this big, heaping cup of coffee, and she says, Chaim, you know why I'm bringing you such a big cup of coffee? Because you made a siyum today, and I'm so proud of you. And then when Reb Chaim wasn't in the room, she turned to them and she said, you know why I said that? Because the most important responsibility that a wife has is to praise her husband. The words of praise that a wife says to her husband are the most important words she will ever say. Now I want to tell you something. I'm not a storyteller. I don't really do stories. Everything I'm telling you now, I made Maran sheets. Because I like to give a shir. I didn't hand it out. You can look at it after. I don't want to distract you with the facts. I don't want to distract you with the facts. Whatever I'm saying today has Maran to back it up. Except for what I just told you. But what I just told you is even greater than a Maran Makom. It says it in the Art Scroll biography. Okay? And it's on page 139. On page 139. That Rebbetzin Kanievsky said to Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein and his other chavrusa, so the Rebbetzin would tell Reb Chaim, listen, in this world I could help you with everything. The one thing I can't help you with is your chayvos. Okay, that's the only thing. We'll talk about that. But Reb Chaim Kanievsky is a product of a father and a mother. He's a product of the Chazon Ish. When the Stipler first got married, the Stipler, his wife, Reb Chaim, and the Chazon Ish all lived in the same, not the same house, in the same room. They lived in the same room. The Chazon Ish took a curtain, and on one side was the Stipler and his wife, and the other side was the Chazon Ish and Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So basically, Reb Chaim grew up with a pretty eminent roommate. Reb Chaim's roommate was the Chazon Ish. One time Reb Chaim came into the room, and he sees it's the middle of the day, the Chazon Ish was lying down, and the Chazon Ish was talking to himself. He said, Atzlan, you're lying down in the middle of the day, and the Chazon Ish, pulled himself out of bed. Chazon Ish woke up every morning at 3 a.m., irrespective of when he went to sleep, whether he went to sleep at 12 o'clock, whether he went to sleep at 1 o'clock. Chazon Ish would get up at 3 a.m. Can you imagine? Reb Chaim is growing up as a young boy, his roommate, next to him, in the bed over, is the Chazon Ish. Reb Chaim said that toward the end of the Chazon Ish's mother's life, who was also Reb Chaim's grandmother, the Chazon Ish's mother would come and daven with the Chazon Ish Yamim Noiram. Every single day, the Chazon Ish visited his mother. Not only did he visit his mother, he would shmooze with his mother and tell her stories about the Alta Haim in Kosovo for at least 30 minutes a day. Reb Chaim was astounded. The Chazon Ish doesn't have 30 seconds, he doesn't have 3 seconds. He would visit his mother daily and schmooze with her and tell her war stories. Actually, and this comes to another important ingredient of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and maybe he even learned this from the Chazon Ish. If Bachrim would come to Reb Chaim and ask Reb Chaim, I'm becoming bar mitzvah, is there one particular mitzvah that I should excel in, I should focus on? In other words, I'm becoming a bar mitzvah and I'm going to keep all the mitzvahs, but is there something I should specialize in? Reb Chaim would say, keep it ava'im. Keep it ava'im. And Reb Chaim brought a raya from the Yushalmi in Kedushin, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Bei Rabbi Boin, Misha Yichud Loi Mitzvah V'loi Avar Aleh Miyavav, Ma yislach amar Rabbi Meir, kagoin kibbud avayim. The paragon of a mitzvah to specialize in is the mitzvah of kibbud avayim. Every time Reb Chaim and his wife had a child, before they named the child, they would ask their parents. When Reb Chaim wrote a sefer, before he named the sefer, he would ask his father. Before he published the sefer, he would show it to his father. One time, Reb Chaim put out Hagois on the Rambam, I think Kiryas Melech. He showed it to the stipler. The stipler took out 15 pieces. And Reb Chaim didn't ask why, what's wrong. No, it was like, look, it emanated from the Lishkas Hagazis. He took it out. 15 years later, he republished the sefer. And when he republished it, he put back in the 15 pieces and he brought it to the stipler. The stipler went through it. He took out the same 15 pieces. One time they told the stipler, Chaim's back is hurting. The stipler thought they meant his son. So the stipler went to Reb Chaim. He says, lie down. Okay, the Tata says, lie down. It's like a choiki, ein l'cha rishus l'hara acharav. Reb Chaim lies down. The stipler gave Reb Chaim a massage. He put oil in his back. And when the stipler came home, they said, where did you go? He said, I went to Reb Chaim. No, not your son Chaim, your grandson. The stipler said, I told Chaim to lie down. I bet he's still going to lie there until I tell him to get up. Because the stipler said lie down, and he never said to come up. The stipler came in the morning, Reb Chaim was still there. The Tata said lie down, you don't move until he tells you to get up. That was his kibbud avayim. If the father said something, not why. You ever hear there's some kids, not in Baltimore, but in other states, when you say something, they say, yeah, but why? One time the Chazon Ish went into a classroom to faher the children, and you always have, in every shir, you have the random question guy. You know the random question guy? You ever hear such phenomenon? A Rav could be giving a shir. The topic is Hilchos Pesach. But there's a guy who must ask a question about Shiluach HaKein. Right? You always have the random question guy at the shir. So, now, the random question guy also doesn't come from nowhere. He was a random question kid in the yeshiva. Chazon Ish came to give a farher in the yeshiva, and there's a kid in the back, ooh. When the Chazon Ish comes to give a farher, you don't ask him questions, right? So the Rebbe was motioning to the kid, put your hand down, So the Chazon Ish says, I'll come to you at the end of the shir. So the Chazon Ish finished the farher. He turns to the kid. The kid says, Chazon Ish says, what would you like to ask? So the boy says, I wanted to know, how did you become the Chazon Ish? That may have been the toughest question the Chazon Ish ever faced. And the Chazon Ish said, B'peh moleh, that his greatness, he was zoicha to, in the merit of the mitzvah of kibbud avayim, because of the honor he showed his mother. It's interesting, when Reb Chaim wrote his sefer, Time of the Kra. Time of the Kra is maybe one of the classics from Reb Chaim. In my edition, and I think in every edition, in the beginning of Time of the Kra, you have a commentary on Braisa de Meleches HaMishkan, which is a random addition to Time of the Kra. What does it have to do with Time of the Kra? Time of the Kra is a parish on Chumash. So Reb Chaim said he was following the model of the Meshech Chochmah. Really, the Meshech Chochmah has two great works. He has the Or Sameach and the Meshech Chochmah. Probably the Meshech Chochmah is more popular. But he first wrote the Or Sameach because he said, if I start with a parish on Chumash, people are going to say I'm a darshan. So this way, let me at least establish my credentials as a lamdin with Or Sameach, and then I'll write the Meshech Chochmah. So Reb Chaim followed that paradigm by publishing Braisa de Meleches HaMishkan as the Hakdama to Time of the Kra. If you look in Time of the Kra, of all the Svarim, of Chumash and Nevi'im and Ksuvim, anybody know which Sefer on Tanakh has the longest perush by far? By far, Esther is the biggest chelek of Time of the Kra. Why? Because Reb Chaim, you're not supposed to work on Purim. Not only not supposed to work, even writing chidushim, Reb Chaim held was questionable. But on Esther, you could write on Purim. It's in Yana D'Yoma. So every Purim, Reb Chaim spent the day writing chidushim on Megillas Esther. So they asked him, but if you look in his parish on the Rambam, Kiryas Melech, it says at the end of it, Siyamti Leil Purim. So if you're so careful not to write chidushim on Purim, how did you complete your parish on the Rambam the night of Purim? Says Reb Chaim, because Kiryas Melech on the Rambam, I didn't just write a sefer. I wrote the Perush Kiryas Melech on the Rambam as a shalach manas to give to my father, to be machabed my father. So that was the tremendous kibbud avayim of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim was not a man of many words. You may be familiar with that. Anyone who has zoichet to be in the presence of Reb Chaim, you got a minute, you got a few minutes. You know, it's well known that Reb Chaim wouldn't even say the full words, bracha v'hatzlacha. You know, they even made a song out of it. He would say buha. But the $1 million question is, why did he say that? You know, why couldn't he say bracha v'hatzlacha? So Reb Chaim would teach an idea that I found in the writings of the Chidah from Reb Chaim Vital, that a person is given a certain allotment of words in this world. A person is given a certain number of words. And whenever you could choose brevity, it's always preferable to choose brevity over being long-winded. Reb Chaim accounted for every single word he said. And you know, they once asked Reb Chaim by Metzora, as part of the purification of a Metzora, the Metzora sends out 2 birds. One bird is shechted, and one bird chatters, to indicate that what brought this person to speak Lashon Hara is excessive dibor. So they asked Reb Chaim, the person spoke Lashon Hara. What does it have to do with excessive speech? He didn't speak excessively, he spoke Lashon Hara. So Reb Chaim would teach that excessive chatter and excessive speaking inevitably leads to Lashon Hara. One of the most notable and important aspects of Reb Chaim Kanievsky were his chayvos. Now, I actually have a sefer here. You ready for this? The name of the sefer is, you ever see this? HaChayvos. This is a sefer on the obligatory learnings of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. You know, people wonder, so what exactly did Reb Chaim learn? So I'm going to share with you, this was the official schedule of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Depending on what era of his life he was up to, at some time between 12 and 1:30 a.m., Reb Chaim woke up for the day. He began with Tikkun Chatzos, followed by learning Zohar. Zohar he learned privately. He didn't learn in a way that people could see. He followed that by Tehillim. You know how much Tehillim he said? 1 perek of Tehillim a day. In Elul, 10 prakim a day. In Aseret Simei Tshuva, the entire Tehillim every day. After Tehillim, Nevi'im and Ksuvim, a perek a day. Followed by Mishnah Brura, 3 blot a day. Followed by the Rambam, a few pages a day. Shulchan Aruch, 5 blot a day. Shas, 8 blot a day. And Shas meant 8 blot with the Yerushalmi and the Tosefta on the Gemara. So you ask, when did Reb Chaim, when was he Maver Sedra? Friday morning, after the mikvah, he went to shul. He was Maver Sedra with Rashi, with Targum, with the Mechilta on Shemais, with the Toras Kayanim on Vayikra, with Sifra and Sifri. By the way, so that's what I mentioned before. The Rebbetzin would say, Chaimel, I can help you with anything in this world. I just can't help you with your chayvos. At 1:30 or so, both of their alarms would go off. Reb Chaim would do his chayvos. The Rebbetzin also had chayvos. What were the Rebbetzins chayvos? The Rebbetzin learned, she said to Tehillim, every day Geras Ramban, Perek Shira, 2 halachas of Lashon Hara, and Orchos Tzadikim. it's not likely that we can copy the chayvos of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. It's unlikely we could do 8 blot of Gemara a day, 3 pages of Mishnah Berurah a day, 5 blot of Shulchan Aruch a day. But everybody, according to their own level, can have things that they learn every day, can have obligatory learnings. Maybe you can't learn a parak a day. You can learn 2 psukim of Nevi'im and Ksuvim a day. You can learn a sif of Shulchan Aruch every day. If somebody would take upon themselves specific obligatory learnings, one would see that you could probably learn more than you think you would have otherwise. But this is really my favorite part of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. They asked Reb Chaim, when did you start doing the chayvos? So Reb Chaim said, I started when I was 16 years old. So he said, and how did it go? Reb Chaim said, I couldn't do it. I tried. I couldn't do it. So he said, so what did you do? So Reb Chaim said, I tried again at 17. And how did it go? Reb Chaim said, I couldn't do it. It was too hard for me. It was too much. So he said, and what did you do then? I tried again at 18. And this time it went. Oyem v'noira. Reb Chaim Kanievsky couldn't be Reb Chaim Kanievsky when he started. He wasn't able to do it. It was too hard for him. It was above and beyond his reach. But that doesn't mean he couldn't try again. And he kept at it, he kept at it, he kept at it. And imagine if he would have thrown in the towel. Imagine if he would have said, you know what? Chayvos are for some other big gadol. Not for me. It's too much for me. Every rabbi knows that this is the most used expression in the United States of America. Could you come to the shiur? Yeah, I'll try. Are you going to be able to help us out? Yeah, I'm going to try. I'll try. Every rabbi and every adult knows I'll try means no. Sometimes I'll try means no and don't ask me again. Sometimes I'll try means if you call me again, I will never speak with you. Reb Chaim would say, if somebody would say, I don't have time, that's a code word for saying, I don't want to. I don't have time means I don't want to. Because anything you want to do, you'll find time to do it. And I love this expression. I don't have time means I don't want to. The Chida writes, in his Sefer Avodas HaKodesh, in Ois Kufnu and Gimel, he's talking about all the different things we have to do on Shabbos and all the different learning responsibilities. And the Chida writes a magnificent line. The Chida says, Umi she'enoi ma'abed es hazman, yesh zman l'koil. If somebody doesn't waste time, there's time for everything. You know, Reb Chaim Kanievsky had one of the largest levayos in the history of the Jewish people. He must have been a big speaker. He must have been, very inspiring. He must have commanded big audiences. How many times did Reb Chaim Kanievsky speak publicly in his whole life? Never. How many people ever heard Reb Chaim Kanievsky speak for 1 minute consecutively? I don't know if anybody did. Once a year, he gave a very, very brief shiur on Yerushalmi for his father's Yahrtzeit. Reb Chaim Kanievsky wasn't a speaker. People didn't hear him talk. And yet he commanded the love of all of Klal Yisrael. It's amazing, for a man who didn't waste a minute, he kept a Gemara in the car so that when they would drive him, he would be able to learn. And when he needed to walk for medical reasons, he kept a Gemara on each bench so that he could learn when he sat down. He was probably the most accessible gadol that we have ever known. If you think about the fact that Reb Chaim Kanievsky was in our generation, if you would have picked up a random storybook, it's called The Story of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And you didn't know that he lived in the 20th century, in the 21st century. And you would have had to figure out, when did this man live? in the 13th century, in the 14th century. If you didn't know when this man lived, there's no way in a million years you would have pegged him for our generation. Who here, who has been to Eretz Yisrael, most people have met with Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He was literally the most accessible gadol in recent memory. Any letter you wrote to him, he answered you. He was mafker himself to the Jewish people. On Purim, he sat the entire day. And people walked before him and he said, bracha v'atzlacha, bracha v'atzlacha. Not for 20 minutes, for hours and hours. And Reb Chaim on Purim drank a lot. And they said, why you drink so much? He says, the Yerushalmi says that tiredness makes you thirsty. That his reality was what Chazal say. For someone who never wasted a moment, he was mafker himself to the Jewish people. Reb Chaim would say, today I answered 80 letters. Any letter that was sent to him, he answered. It doesn't matter who wrote him a letter. It doesn't matter how ridiculous the questions were. Any letter I wrote to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, I still have. Many letters that I wrote to him as a bacher. These were not earth-shattering questions. These were not dvarim ha'imdim berumah shalaylam. These were things that, pop into yeshiva bacher's head. Actually, I have a friend who would write to Reb Chaim almost every day. A long list of questions. And at one point, Reb Chaim said, bracha v'hatzlacha, he said. So, we should consider ourselves privileged that of all the generations in world history, Hashem gave us Reb Chaim Kanievsky, someone of such a caliber that was given to the Dar Achroin in the final generation. We spoke about the tremendous tefillos the Stipler put into him. We spoke about the cheshek for learning that the Stipler engendered within him. We spoke about his illustrious uncle, the Chazon Ish, the time that the Stipler spent learning with him, the chizuk that his wife gave him, how careful he was with every word, his obligatory learnings, his kibbud of ha'im. These were all things that made up Reb Chaim Kanievsky, that we were zoicha to be in his generation. I think whatever we said tonight was begeder efes katseu sira v'kulai loy sira, just to scratch the surface of some of the greatness of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. We say in our generation, ein lanu eish, we don't have the fire from Shamayim. Ein lanu urim v'tumim, ein lanu arayin, ein lanu ruach hakodesh, v'loy mikdash, v'loy koyen, v'loy navi, v'loy menorah, v'loy shulchan. But we had Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And now we don't have him. Look what the world looks like today, as opposed to when Reb Chaim was here protecting the whole world. So, we're already in the year 5786. It's Erev Shabbos. You could probably already make an early Shabbos, this much into Friday. Hashem gave the Dar Achron Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and until the great day, we need great Rachamei Shamayim to continue to protect us. Yehei Zechroi Baruch. Thank you very much. Baruch.